Hello and welcome everyone to the sixth episode of the ATC Tape Reading Podcast. My name is David Torres and I'm a current student with ATC. So a little chat room plug before we get started with this podcast is if you're interested in tape reading and you want to learn more about our methodology, feel free to comment below and we'll get you in our chat room. You can join our live lessons, our live meetings, and much more. And we're also going to have live streaming to come in the coming weeks, so look forward to that. And this week's podcast is going to be a more of an interview style rather than talking about specific methodology and things within a methodology. So I really look forward to this. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Rich Lepis, the CEO and head instructor of Ahead of the Charts. Rich, how you doing?
Hey, how you doing, Dave? As always, fun to be here.
Yeah, I'm really
Um,
enjoying our weekly podcast now. So
absolutely, and I'm looking forward to the amount of things that we're going to be implementing in over the next, couple of weeks with our, the live streaming and everything. We're definitely hitting the new year head on.
yeah, I feel like a lot of students have been asking for like that live stream, the phase present stuff. So it feels good really getting that out to them here in the near future. So with this podcast, it's going to be more of an interview style. So I feel like we really always talk about methodology and just questions about trading, but I really wanted like kind of dive back in history of who is the beginning trader, Rich, and how did you really get to the place you're at now with this methodology and your success in trading? So my first question to you is, how would you describe this methodology you created to a seasoned trader?
Well, so it's kind of interesting. When I first started to trade, I wasn't even actually a trader. I worked for another company that taught people how to trade, and I was in sales, to be completely honest. So I used to do insurance back a long, it seems like forever ago. And I just wasn't happy about it. And I remember one time sitting there in my office, just kind of Googling, you know, at work home jobs, and trading came up, and I started watching a bunch of videos and stuff like that. So I was living in Connecticut at the time, and then I decided to move back to New York, and out of nowhere, it was either and back then, Indeed wasn't, we're going over 11 years ago. So Indeed wasn't huge yet. We didn't have ZipRecruiter and stuff like that. Most of the time when you went to go find a sales type job, you went to Craigslist. And I ended up seeing this job on Craigslist, and it was for sales at a trading education company. So it kind of clicked. It was like, I want to learn how to do this, but I also need to make money. So what's a better way than to join a company that I'm going to learn how to trade while I'm doing sales for them, and really learn the ins and outs of how this actually works. Now, unfortunately, I never really got that far, but there was somebody that was in, well, when I say I didn't really get that far, the company that I was doing sales for, one of the best salesmen in the world, and teaches you the basics, I mean, phenomenally. So understanding, what time in sales actually is, just understanding bid and ask, understanding what an order book is, understanding when they put their big orders out there. So it really gave me that foundation. But what I found is there was no real black and white, this is what I can look for. And one of the biggest problems that especially when I first started at the sales company, people, every time I would look at, trading websites or trading stuff, it was all about game plan. And I never really had a solid foundation of a game plan. So what essentially I found out is that a lot of people use indicators. People love to have lines on their chart and love to have, kind of almost that holy type grail. But what I found out was time in sales was the only thing that cannot change. You can't fake buying and you can't fake selling. If it shows up, it shows up. That's exactly what it was. So there was this person in the chat room during the time, and he was actually a paying customer. I was, helping out in this chat room as I was doing sales for the company. And we just used to kick ideas around. So we would see a bunch of prints come in at a certain point, but instead of actually trading them, and this is one of the biggest things, is that I went through a learning phase because I wasn't ready to be a trader yet. I honestly, at the time when I first started, I just had a SIM account. I didn't even have the actual money in a brokerage account yet. So we just started kicking ideas around. Every time we saw something that jumped out, we sat there and we said, okay, why did this happen? Why did this happen? So for a seasoned trader, essentially what it is we figured out a way to understand when the numbers showed up, what the person on the other side of the computer was actually thinking. And it's just like, I'm not sure if you're into any type of like history within the wars and stuff like that, but when you know what a enemy's game plan is, it just makes life so much easier. And that's really what it came down to, was understanding of who's behind the computer, and when they show me this grouping of numbers, what do those numbers actually mean?
That's interesting because you've made a point there where your first year was not set to make money or try to make money. It seems like you spent the first year trying to just develop that game plan before you even put any of your own money to use.
Just trying to figure out how it worked. This is not an easy game to play.
And that makes sense. And I feel like currently a lot of people come into the market with the just trying to make money right away. And I mean, just looking from your perspective and your past, that wasn't the case.
I can promise you this is not a get rich quick scheme. It takes work. There's no shortcuts to take. There's no bots out there that last long term. If you think about it, is there any successful trader you've ever met that says, well, I get my great call outs from this person?
No, and all the
Doesn't work.
successful traders that I've listened to or heard, they've had their stories where they were in the trenches just learning.
Oh man, well, I mean, that's almost a right as a trader. I've never met somebody that just went out the gate and was successful. There's two, and the biggest reason because of that psychology. Because
Right,
even once you have a methodology, it's hard to control yourself because we're programmed in a certain way.
right. So what did your first year of trading your actual money look like? So when you reflect to that first year, was there certain things that you can vividly remember? It could be highlights, could be struggles, it could be maybe floating a bit. Is there anything within that first year
So
like actually
I
pushing the button?
it took me about, so after, we're saying my first year when I started putting trading, I already had maybe 6 months to a year in just watching this type of stuff. So when you say my first year of trading, it technically was my first year of pushing the button. It wasn't my actual first year of trading. And what I found was that once I understood what was going to happen, the hardest thing, as I kind of just said, was controlling myself. So my patience levels, understanding this is what has to happen, but waiting for the perfect setup, waiting for the actual prints to come in. Because I'm going to tell you something, as a beginning trader, my biggest downfall was when a chart moved, I wanted to be in it.
Hmm,
And it's just so hard not to, because you see it either running up or but if it has no substance behind it, that's really where you end up getting burned. So in my beginning year, so let's call it a year and a half. After about 6 months of actually putting money into account, I was starting to make about $200 a day. So out of a week, maybe five, and you got to keep in mind, I kept my shares very low because I was still trying to learn. And I know it's not really a joke, but I used a lot of negative reinforcement. And I told you guys, I used, when we were in the trades exchange once, how can I help myself? Every time I did something that I knew I shouldn't have done, I used to keep a rubber band on my wrist and I would snap the rubber band. Now, I'm not telling anyone out there to do that because, it is, but I really, it was all about getting my brain right and getting to the point where I wasn't trading with emotions, because it's crazy. There's two major parts of trading. Okay. One of them's money, because why does anyone get into trading? And then the other one's the emotional part of it. But trading has no spot for either of those. It's literally set up for the fact that you have to be a robot. Okay. And you can't think about money. It's just playing a game. And that first year when I first started, well, let's call it a year and a half, when I first started to actually make, a little bit of money, that's when I started to realize that that's when I found some success. But I'm going to tell you something. After I found that success, as most traders, I got cocky. I'm like, I know what I'm doing. So I upped my shares and I ended up giving it all back. And when I say giving it all back, I mean, I wasn't, it wasn't anything crazy, because, one thing that I've always been able to do is cut my losers. It's the most important part of trading, is to make sure that if the stock goes against a certain point with your game plan, that you have to get out. So it wasn't a ton, but at the same, that's really what it came down to, was just understanding that this is what it is. I don't get to pick the market. If it's a dead day, I don't get to make a lot of money that day. It just is what it is.
right.
And when the person I was talking about, in the other chat room, really, when we used to throw ideas against each other, it really helped having somebody there just to see if they were thinking the same thing, and asking tons of questions. I mean, that's another big thing that I did. I was the most annoying human being you've ever met in your life. And I realized from being that annoying, all I used to be is like, why did this happen? Why did this happen? Why did this happen? And we found out sometimes you just don't know. There's just nothing there that could definitively tell you what's going to happen. And when that's the case, you can't trade it.
Interesting. So it really helped to have the individual to really kind of bounce your thoughts around with, and
So
I
that
feel
was
like
when making the methodology. So
okay,
when
yeah,
making the actual tape reading methodology coming behind it, because as you know, there's not a book out there that just tells you how to tape read.
no,
You
and
have
there's
Wyckoff, you have, a few things, but there's no book that tells you how to tape
and
read.
even those books are just extremely difficult to read. They don't give
Oh
you
God.
insights
It's
into this market right now at all. It's just it. I read it and I was like, what am I reading?
exactly. And especially imagine being dyslexic and trying to read all the, if you remember that, time and sales used to be in fractions.
Yeah. Oh my. And
It was just, it was a nightmare to read.
I'm getting seasoned tape reader now, and I'll go back and look through that book, and I'm like, there's no way any retail mind is gathering information where they can use this and be useful into their bring it into their live trading. It's just
I
that's
completely
extremely
agree with
difficult.
you. That's something that if you want to read, it's almost like, that's why I don't mention it much. It's something that's like almost if you want to read when you go back after you get that screen time in a couple of years, and if you go back, you start to understand that. But as someone that's just learning how to tape read to try to read that stuff, I mean, the man was brilliant. So it's like trying to read a physics textbook but never taken physics before.
Right. So at what point did you really sit down and be like, okay, I have this methodology and it's created and it's a sound methodology. How long did that take? Was there a moment, an instant, and like just a realization like this is my methodology? I know you didn't call it 1 through 4 back then, but how did you describe your setups? Like, did you have a playbook where you analyze specific prints that you used to use all the time, or how did that process look like?
So probably by fault of my own, I almost expected people to understand what I was saying. So if you get huge bid prints, the stock needs to pull back first. So the reason I named it 1 through 4 is just because once you put that attached to it, it just becomes so much simpler. There's literally only really four. I mean, there's technically six, but there's really only four situations that happen to a very high percentage. So when adding that to it, it's always been there. If you go back to the recordings, 7 years ago, it's still the same information. It was just assigning that just to try to make it better. And I'm going to tell you something. As I've become a better trader, I've become a better teacher. So I was not as I didn't teach as well as I did 6 years ago as I do today. It's just that it's that simple. The progression of myself within trading has made it easier for me to kind of make it black and white rather than having that feel. And the
Mhm.
problem with feel is you can't teach it.
Right. So so you started teaching pretty early on in your career.
Yeah, I
Was
wasn't ready to teach at that point when
yeah.
I first started teaching. I knew once again, I knew the basics. I knew it was going to happen to a certain extent, but I was not. I wouldn't have paid my money to be honest. But I was put in a position, and I knew enough to to get high percentage trades. But at that time, I'm finding 1 to maybe 3 trades a day because they had to really be obvious. It wasn't like now where I can just kind of look at a stock and understand what the flow of it's going to be.
And I wonder if you being put in that position really pressured you to create the methodology in order to really provide that for others within that
I
was listening to you, right?
I truly believe it was a blessing because I'm the type of person I don't want to let anyone down, and I don't feel comfortable teaching somebody if I don't know. So it forced me to immediately figure this out.
So that teaching period, even though in initial phases you didn't really know what you were doing, it really helped and made you develop what the 1 through 4 is now.
Well, I mean, I don't want to say I don't know what I was doing, but making $200 a day, I don't know if really qualifies someone for
Gotcha.
for training, the masses.
Right.
You know what I mean? Once it
Yeah.
gets to a certain point, so it's not like I didn't know what I was doing. I knew what I was doing. It was just there was a lot of times I questioned myself. And and I'm going to tell you right now, most of the times that I questioned myself was because what I saw just wasn't there. There was no the stock was moving, but there was no definitive reason. And that, like I said before, that's a huge part of understanding being a tape reader is that 80% of what you see is noise. It's, the 20% of what really gets you those high probability trades. And as a new trader, that's such a hard thing to really grasp, because anytime a stock moves, you want to be able to put an answer to it. But we've seen stocks go up on all in between prints, $10 before, and there's not one print. And it's, sometimes there's no method to the madness.
Oh yeah, and that's such a difficult thing when you're just starting tape reading, something's moving up and you want to go long. But I can even attribute to an example today in LCID, it was pulling up on nothing but selling. So, and
Hmm.
I know some students got confused and they're like, this needs to continue up higher, but the selling wasn't there to indicate that. And personality really told us that it wasn't going to pull up a ton, and then we ended up getting a phenomenal short based
Yeah,
upon that.
and you and Davis actually in our chat room today broke that down perfectly. And if you look at it right now, it's at 38. But the prince at that moment told us we had a phenomenal short, and everyone made great money on that. But it was, once again, understanding those prints. And that's another thing too, is that it's, the intricacies that go into it. It's not just, we set our rules based off something that could be black and white, but then there's no such thing as black and white. It's always a
Right.
gray area. So understanding those little intricacies that go into it, you guys, hit it on the head. We ended up, what, another $2 to the downside?
It was a wonderful trade. And that's the thing with this methodology I've learned is, yes, you have your 1 through 4, but those 1 through 4 are not black and white. You really need to look at the supporting prints, the rest of the setup, to really give you the rest of the percentage to take a high percentage trade. But I feel like once you narrow that down, that is what allows you to be able to cut out the noise within the tape when you already have the setup where the market maker is already telling you how much money they need to build or they need to make, and then you're just looking for those little fine details and those show up within the tape. And I mean, I would agree that 20% is what you really want to look at, and the 80% is just noise.
And arguably, that's the beginning of my career, that was the most important thing that I had to learn, is that not everything means something. Because if you tried to catch every single print that went through time and sales for every single stock, impossible.
Oh yeah,
So
you
really
just be
just, yeah, so just really understanding the fact that there's only certain things that really need to be looked at, filtering out that noise. That's a huge part. But, in the beginning of my career, I like to be a know-it-all too. So,
Mhm.
thinking like, oh, well, I know why this stock, but then there was times I'm like, I can't justify why this happened. And learning that I'm not going to be always justified. If I can't justify it, just don't trade it, because I'll find something I can justify.
Mhm. So within those moments, were there any periods where you just felt like quitting and calling it, a day and just wrapping it up and finding something else?
Oh man, yes. I mean, there were too many times for me to even go through. Because especially in the beginning, there's this thing that we do, just as human nature, is that we have, let's say, a great week, and we think everything's done now. We think we don't have to, everything that got us to there. So watching recordings, having our screen time, watching time and sales, being there early in the morning to watch what's going on in the pre-market, all those things, we think we got it now, and then all of a sudden we stop doing everything that brought us to success, and then we go crashing down again. So that whole week, that, or, it could be a month, it could be, and that's happened many times in my career, where I had to realize that when I think I have it, I still have way longer to go. And that's why I always tell you guys, there's no such, from 1 to 10, there's no such thing as a 10 trader, because you're always learning. You're always finding a new pattern. You're always trying to pay attention to what goes on. Now, the
Mhm.
great thing about time and sales, it's never going to change. It hasn't changed from the inception. So we're never going to have an indicator that works really well, and then all of a sudden the market knows that, and then starts trying to trick us from that. Prints are prints. They have to work the way they work. If you buy a huge position, the stock they need to make money on it. It's that simple. Otherwise, they're not going to be there anymore.
Right.
So it's just, that's such a big part of it, is that it's like an invisible staircase. So like, it's so hard for a new trader to see it, because it's not going to be quick. Like I said, this is not a get rich quick scheme. So it's that invisible staircase. It's believing that I'm going to take this step even though I can't see the next step towards where I'm going.
Mhm.
And you have to trust that, because what I'm telling you, it feels like this. And you could ask, any successful trader in our room, any successful trader anywhere, they'll tell you, all of a sudden one day things just changed. And the route that they took, whether it be, whipping themselves with a rubber band, or 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 reading psychology books or whatever it is, it feels like all of a sudden that one day things just you just see what you need to see rather than seeing everything.
Right.
And that's when everything changes. And that probably didn't happen to me in probably, let's give or take, maybe 3.5 years in.
So what did your work ethic look like to really get to that point? Like if you took us through your average day, were you at your desk every single
Every
moment of
second.
every
Every
second
second. And then there
and
was
at
that
night?
when I first actually started, once I started being successful at this, I used to do maybe 5, 6 coachings a day.
Mm,
So it was 6 straight hours of coaching. And in my opinion, coaching somebody on how to do something, as long as you know how, because I don't agree with someone that doesn't know what they're doing trying to teach somebody.
right.
But when I started doing that coaching, it changed everything. It was like I was moving in light speed rather than in minutes because of the fact that every time someone asked me, I had to figure it out.
You
So
had to know
there,
the answer to the question.
well, that's the thing. And then it's funny because you take a little step every time when you really start to get this. When you start to try to grow from it, it's like you take one step back, but then 2 steps forward. But the time frame it takes to take those steps forward back come really quickly. So when I first started coaching, it kind of brought me back a little bit because there was things people were asking me that just weren't possible to answer. If I give you 10 pages of in between prints and someone asks you why the stock went up, how are you going to answer that?
You could either make up an answer or one you don't know.
See, and that's the thing. So I actually took a step back when I first started doing that because I felt the need to try to answer everybody, even when there were no answers. But then once that really ingrained into me, sometimes, Rich, you don't have to just answer something. I don't know. I have no idea
Mhm.
why this happened. So it took a little step back, but then once I got that in my head and I went forward, now when I'm doing my own trading and I'm looking at time and sales, I understand sometimes I just have no idea.
Mhm.
Someone could ask me about a stock, and you know what? I would love to give you an answer and a great trade, but I don't know.
Right. And you've always told us it takes an obsessed mind to really be very successful at this, especially tape reading. And from my perspective, it just seems like you obsessed about the whole teaching aspect, which allowed you to really get a solid perspective on every single thing that you do see. And when you don't see something, your mind just is laser focused, or when you see something that you don't know, your mind just becomes so laser focused on the the outcome after, and it just feels like you keep a log of things.
Well, and I'm going to tell you two things: the teaching aspect and journaling. Okay, my journaling was obsessive.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I would sit and not even in a good way sometimes because there's only so much stuff that you can write in a journal. You'll notice when I do my classes how many variables are usually in my trades. They're usually pretty simple.
Yeah, usually all the
It's
same, really.
Yeah, so in the beginning part, I used to obsess and try to write everything. But what I realized is that, first of all, journaling, too many people treat trading as if you want to be a successful trader, it's not a hobby. Okay? It's that simple. This is not a hobby. This needs to be a career. This is a business that you're opening. And it's like, so many people, so many students I've had in the past, they ask me questions and say, okay, well, I'm not succeeding right now. I say, okay, that's perfect. You know what? Send me a month of your journals. I'm going to go through every single one of them. And their answer is, I don't have my journals.
Oh man.
To, to me, that's baffling because you're opening your own business. That's like not paying, having your tax return done at the end of the year. That's like you're not paying attention to anything that's going on. And the thing that we learn about trading is that numbers don't lie.
Right.
So, I've heard so many students tell me, well, it was just this one, it was just this one, it was just this one. But then you look and they've been 20% for the month. They're not really. It's never the market's fault. Too many people think that the market's not fixed. Well, I mean, maybe it's fixed to a certain extent, but you can't. When the numbers are there, you can't fake the numbers. Like I said, if somebody's going to buy a ton of shares, they have to make money or they're going to get fired.
Right. And these patterns within the tape just constantly repeat themselves for you not to journal and really analyze them, and you're just setting yourself up for just to float for a very long time.
And that's the thing, our classes that are coming up a week from now, we're going to be talking about the different type of personalities of the stock. Okay, and each personality has a specific way to trade it. So to not these patterns, there's not a lot of them. It's very simple. Supply and demand is a very simple concept, and that's how the market works. People talk about these dark pool prints all the time, and what do I do about these? Who cares? has no effect on what a stock is going to do at that exact moment when that dark. And of course, there's way to trade those, and we can use them as levels, blah 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 blah. But I've always, throughout my entire career, what I've tried to do is keep it simple. The more advanced I got, the less progression I actually saw.
Interesting.
Because supply and demand as a whole is such a simple concept. So to make it any more, advanced than that just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, because you're a big advocate of keeping it simple, and that's kind of your theme throughout classes, journaling, just studying everything and anything within this methodology is keeping it simple. And it's interesting because to the tape to most people is not simple. It's one of the most complex things. They'll look at it and be so confused. But the way you teach it and the way 1 through 4 is set up, it's just a story, and you keep that story simple, and then you look for certain variables to keep that story continuously simple.
Either tells our story is going to happen or our story is going to be changed a bit. But
So,
that's two situations. It's only
right,
two, so that's once again that's very simple to think about.
right. And to
I
me,
mean, I do want to say one thing really quick
yeah,
though, is that not that I'm ashamed of this at all, but I do want to know anyone that's going to be starting tape reading. It took me a good maybe 2 months to understand what ask and bid was. I could not get that, so I'm going to be completely honest with you. I just couldn't get it. I had
I was
such a
right there
hard
with you.
time understanding why sell prints were coming up as green, buy prints were coming up as red. It took me a while. So once again, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. So it's not, if I could do it, pretty much anyone could do it. It just is going to take that focus.
Yeah, and I had a similar experience. It was super difficult for me to understand when I was first learning. Aspirants meant someone was selling on the other side, and person executing is buying. That just took me forever to really grasp my mind around.
Mm-hmm. I was in the
So
same boat.
yeah, so I can see that. So when it came to your trading success, it seems like the classes are teaching really help propel you. And to me, it almost seems like they're your form of journals nowadays. I know that you're in your 10th plus year of trading, and now your journals are not much in depth because you've earned that right. But genuinely, I still think that you do journal, and I think you do a larger form of journaling by teaching and doing them live in classes. I think to me, that's a step beyond journals.
I completely agree with you. I mean, just for when you've been doing you do for ATC, you do these trade breakdowns. How often do you see the same breakdown happen the next day?
Oh, I'll go through one at night and I'll break it down, post it on YouTube, and the next morning I'll take the exact same trade.
You know what I'm saying? So that is a huge aspect of it. But you don't need a school to be able to teach somebody. Talk it out. There's OBS Studio is a free recording thing that anyone can use, and literally go through your time in sales and talk it out to yourself and explain this is what's going to happen. And when you're wrong, so this way you don't have to say it in front of people, but when you're wrong, go back and look. Why was I wrong?
And the tape
You know,
will always tell you why you're wrong.
100%. And I don't want to say that I don't journal because I journal in a different way now. I journal in numbers. So, I'm more interested in the number one trades I take, the number two trades, 3 and 4, the percentage of those trades I take, the percentage of wins on each one of those. I just do it a little bit different now because I'm not at a point where like when I make a wrong trade, I typically know I did it. I'm willing to take that risk. It's almost a gamble. I know it's
Um,
like 60%, but the risk versus rewards there. I know I can cut my losers. So if I'm having a good day, it's just a little bit different the way that I do it now.
yeah, I mean that makes complete sense.
It,
So,
it's not the same pattern, but that's how the same pattern that I teach is the exact same pattern that got me to this point.
right. So when it came to your trading success, was there a moment where you had that parabolic, if we're plotting it as a graph, was there a moment that you had parabolic move to the upside with your trading, or was it pretty linear?
Nope. Okay, so I'll tell you the exact day. The stock was Pandora,
Huh.
when it used to trade. Okay. And I knew it was going to move 50 cents. And I was going to up my shares to 4,000 shares. Now, 4,000 shares might not sound like a ton when you're talking about a market maker, but when you're in your beginning stages, I'm going to tell you, you start to sweat. You can't sit down in your chair. Your face is maybe an inch away from the computer screen. And I knew it needed to move 50 cents to the upside. Okay. I bought 4,000 shares of it. Okay. I made 18 cents. You know what the stock did? It
Went the
went
whole,
50 cents.
yep.
It did exact. So that day, in my head, and now that will always be my story. The day that I did that, and I saw what the possibilities were, that's when all of a sudden, it went from, I don't want to say treading water, but a slow uptrend to boom. Okay, now we're parabolic.
Mhm.
And that was the day, because all of a sudden I realized, like, I know what I'm doing. And 4,000 shares was a lot. I mean, that's, and at the time, I believe the stock was like $23, something like that. So it wasn't like it was a huge amount of money or anything like that. But I was so scared, and I realized that there's no ability to have emotions if I'm gonna get where I need to be. And
Right.
from that day on, it's really been almost just trying to push myself. But we're talking about 4,000 shares. Probably took me, we're going into maybe 3.5 years, 4 years. It wasn't it wasn't quick. I went to 1,000 pretty quickly, maybe like 2.5 years. But to really get over 1,000, that took me some time.
Interesting. So as you're over 10 years into this or around close to that area, how are you progressing now as a trader? Because like our whole goal is always to increase our size and our ability to just have more shares. What does this new year look like for you in terms of your growth and what goals you have trading? I know it can be easy to think about monetary, how much you want to make this year, but what other little fine details to get you to that goal
Okay,
that you
so
have?
at this, especially going into this new year, what my game plan is, this is just a game. So I honestly, most of the times, I don't look at my P&L till Friday. Okay, and Friday, the reason I even look at my PL on Friday is I always pay myself something.
Mhm.
So I like to give myself tangible, because otherwise it just becomes numbers. If you make, I'm just making up a number, but let's say you make $10 million, but you literally never touch it, and a number just keeps getting higher, you don't actually get that satisfaction out of it. And we do have to feed our egos a bit, because I don't care who it is. I mean, you could be the Dalai Lama, you still have a sense of ego that's just ingrained into you. So I always do that. But what my goal for each year to get better is to beat last year, and the only way I can do that is to play the game better. So at this point, okay, let's say a stock's at $5. Okay, getting an entry at 504 versus 511, that adds up over the year. Okay, a stock that shows that I could trade, let's make up a number again, 10,000 shares versus 4,000 shares, I can get better. So I can't change what the market gives me at this point. Okay, I can't make the market better. I can't make it from a slow day to a fast day. I can't, we're at the end of the day, when I learned that all I'm doing is following people that are way smarter than me, that was a big, a big epiphany within my life. So what my goal is every single year and every single day, first of all, to find new patterns. Now, unfortunately, you don't find new patterns very often. I've been trying to figure out a pattern between above the ask and below the bid prints for maybe 6 years now. I'm telling you, it's just impossible. There's no real pattern to go off of, because it's basically a coin flip coming into there. But what I can control is I can control my entries, I can control my amount of shares. So every day I'm trying to play the game a little bit better, anticipate a little bit quicker. And that's really what it comes down to. Extend my price target a little bit further instead of being so conservative. And it's the little things like that that literally at the end of the year add up to 100 grand.
So you're just refining your game at that point.
So there's not much. See, the great thing about tape reading, once you have it, there's not really much that changes. Tape reading has been the same since, like I said, the inception of it. So there's not like all of a sudden I'm just going to be able, and one day maybe it could happen, but it's not like I'm just going to find a new way that prints work. It's not like one day all buying means they're just going to lose all their money, because then there would be no banks anymore and everyone would just be screwed. So there's nothing really that can change. It's changing what my game is.
Right. So the structure of supply and demand is always going to be there, and we're going to be able to find market makers to follow and follow their price targets and building. But it really just comes down to refining your execution, your ability for your entries and exits. So,
And find and also, and this isn't something that I would ever suggest for somebody that's like in their first couple of years, but also pushing the limit a little bit. There's sometimes that there's a 60% trade that you could cut your loser, but it has the possibility of really, really being able to take off. So you know what? Eh, And I use the word earned. I feel like that's an earned right because when your percentages are where they are, 60% trade, it's still a coin flip. But if the possibility is so much higher than the revert, the negative possibility, it's sometimes it's worth trying to take. And I wouldn't use a ton of shares in it, but it's really, like you just said, refining your abilities and kind of pushing the limit a little bit.
Interesting. Um, in terms of psychology as well, how are you progressing with that? Because I feel like it's almost at a point where you understand market psychology pretty refined. I don't know how much more is left to really understand when it comes to market psychology because this foundation of this methodology is founded in psychology. Yes, it's tape reading, but what's really behind the tape is the psychology of who we're following. So how are you progressing maybe some psychology or anything in that kind of general area?
I mean, like you said, it kind of, I mean, it's crazy because the more, when you look at time and sales, you think it's this intricate, like almost like type matrix that goes on. We always, make the joke about the girl in the red dress. So like that's what we look for is something that completely stands out within the matrix. But there's just not a lot that they do because you don't fix something that's not broke. They know where retail is going to get in, they know where retail is going to get out, and they just manipulate it day in and day out. So the psychology that I really focus on is myself.
Mm.
It's not, I mean, like I said, there's always something to learn. So I'm not a master of this. I will never say that whatsoever, but I know it to, pretty well. So really what it comes down to is just the better I can make myself psychological, the better I can really kind of, it comes back to, fixing my trading.
Mm.
There's not like, I wish it's crazy because I've been doing these, classes for so long and I don't know how I keep coming up with new ones because it's really not that complicated. I
Yeah,
mean,
no, the
we
material
could
really
really
isn't.
dig in, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, I just feel like it's the material. It's almost like at the end of each year, it does repeat itself because there's not much more to teach. But I feel like as students advance, the psychology of what we're following and what we're doing, or the whole collective as a student group advances. So the topics become more in depth and the understanding becomes more in depth. And I feel like that's been a theme throughout the 5 years of classes that I've watched is just the psychology behind everything has just gotten to such a high pedigree.
And I think, yeah, and I completely agree with you, on that. I think that it's just, we have to keep hitting the same topics. And plus, if someone's brand new, they need to be able to, understand what's going on. But it's literally just digging deeper and deeper and deeper into what we see. But it gets to a point where you're digging deep enough, and it's like, well, we know what they're going to do. I mean, you and Davis did it today in LCID. I mean, how much more perfect could you have called that?
I
Like
didn't give
what
much more
what else
thought to
could
that.
you have done? Let's say another 10 years from now, could you have called that trade any differently?
It'll be the exact same thing.
That's what I mean. So it's like, it was a phenomenal read, but that's, tomorrow you're gonna have another one just like it, and 10 years is gonna be the same one just like it. So it gets to a point where there's only so much that you can do. Now it's just refining yourself, refining your own trading, getting better entries, taking more shares, giving yourself a raise. And I know that sounds kind of almost cocky to a certain extent, but you know what? I started trading and when I was 21. I'm 33, so give or take almost 12 years. It's really more 11. Over 11 years, you see a lot of screen time, especially when you sit at the computer day in and day out.
Countless hours right there, and that's really putting in the work. That's a decade of sitting at the computer, looking at patterns, looking at the tape. I mean,
You know how they say you have to do something, what, 100,000 times or 100,000 times to master it,
uh,
whatever the number is. But I'm way over that in hours.
right, definitely earned it. So, what insights would you share from this eventful past year, 2021, that might help AT students stay on their game? Because I know it's difficult for students to really, you know, take this challenge head on and continue through all the adversity when it comes to tape reading because it is a struggle at the beginning. There's no putting it lightly. It is difficult to learn tape reading. It's like learning a new language. And then on top of that language, it's like learning the emotional intelligence of that language. It's difficult, but once you get there, the patterns continuously repeat themselves. So, what insight maybe that you haven't, told us
It's
in
not. Yeah, I've said this a million times, but the biggest thing I could say to any type of new student coming in, it's not your turn to make money yet. It's your turn to learn how to do this. Because if you
yeah.
come in trying to make money, you're going to do things that are not there. You're going to see things that are not there. You're not going to follow the structure that you're actually being taught. So it is not your turn to make money yet. Now, in 6 months, could it be your turn? Maybe, probably not, though. In a year, could it be your turn to make money? Absolutely. I've seen plenty of people, start to succeed. But when I say make money, I'm talking, $200 a day. No, and I mean that's not like it's nothing. I mean, $1,000. That's what, 50 grand a year. That just coming from trading.
Hmm.
So many people want to hit the ground running, and no one has patience. Patience is such a virtue that we have to understand that it takes in trading. Because in your beginning stages, when you're sitting at the computer, you want to trade at every second. But as me and that's impossible.
So it's a game where you really, I mean, in the beginning, you really have to pay your dues, and you have to pay them in
That's
full
it.
before you really take the step to make money. Because I know I started off jumping the gun, and I was like, this is it, I'm making money. And you find out quickly that that's not the case, and then you take a step back, and then you really pay the dues, and you have to pay them in full. There's no way around that or taking shortcuts to it. This is not a game where you can cut in half or cut the learning curve in half. It is just what it is. And to me, also you stating early on in this podcast that you did pay your dues in full as well. That's not something that you skipped, and that's, I mean, I think we look, all of our students look at you as this wizard that just can read the tape phenomenally, and it's true. But also they don't see the paid in full aspect of all the dues that happened and all the trials that you did early on. And I think that's really good for a lot of students to hear. Check, check. You there, Rich?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the funniest parts about the whole thing is that they didn't see me in the chat room my first year, my
No.
second year. So they all think that it's just, I got this. That's not even close. And now I'm not going to bring, but we've all been in chat rooms before. And there's that one person that's just annoying as hell. I was that person. I just kept asking questions. If they didn't answer me, I just ask it again and ask it again and ask it again. So at the end of the day, no one pays my bills. No one's going to pay your bills. So this is something that you need to learn, but you have to understand you need to learn it.
Hmm.
So coming out and just thinking, we're going to jump out the gate and I'm going to start making money. That's where, we talked about this before, where the biggest problem lies is that if you have a winning week, that is nothing to up your shares on. That is not, you didn't have shit yet. Excuse
Hmm.
my language, but you had nothing. A week of successfulness is nothing. That could have just been a week where every time you hit the button, it went the right way. That doesn't mean you understand this. And so many people get caught up in that. So they'll go a week and be like, okay, I was at 100 shares, but now it's time to make money. So they go up to 1,000 shares. They realize the emotion kicks in and they end up losing their ass. And that's where accounts get blown. So understanding, just back to your last point, understanding that it's not your time yet. If you're just starting, it's not your time. But
Yeah.
just like, if you just start college, how many people that are in college have a great job?
Yeah. I mean, very few,
No, I mean, as
if any.
far as I've ever seen, almost none. I mean, the
Yeah.
percentages are very small. But after college, how many people have gotten phenomenal jobs? And that's really the best way I could break it down is that you're in college now. It's going to take time. If you start thinking about money, you're screwed. I mean, it's that simple. You have to understand that once you learn how to do, it's just a game. When you learn how to play the game, it's as simple as Super Mario. Okay, if you come up to question mark box, you're gonna jump and hit it, and that's the same thing that trading is that when you see a high percentage trade, you just hit it. But it
Yep.
takes a lot. It's not as simple as that. It takes a lot to go in.
Yep. And just really summarizes it right there. You have to pay your dues, and you have to pay them in full. And that's through watching countless hours of courses, watching screen time, asking the right questions, diving into the uncertainty of your journals, your good journals, your bad journals. There's so much to it. So at the end of the day, it's the blood, sweat, and tears and being in the trenches.
That's a really great point that you just made too, though, is that so many people they only go over their bad journals. A winning journal, they think they don't need to. But how many winning trades do you make in the beginning that were terrible trades?
Oh, I can go back and reflect winning trades that I shouldn't have taken in the first place.
So the point you just made is an absolute phenomenal point for anyone listening to this, is that understand it's not just going over the bad things. You need to go over your winners, because they, most of the time in the beginning of your career, there probably shouldn't have been a winner. So that's
And it
something that
creates
I definitely
some of that
think that.
false hope too.
Hmm,
Alrighty. Can I hear you, Rich? Check, check.
yep, check.
All right. Well, I think that summarizes kind of the end of this podcast. I think it was a phenomenal insight into your journey as a student to becoming a teacher and on the course to master this. So I thank you for your time, Rich, and I really hope students gain a lot out of this.
All right, Dave. Always a pleasure.
Take care, Rich.